Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with the Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your Critique of the Week. It's Friday, March 14th. So glad you could join me. Today we're going to take a look at poems like we always do, talking about what works and what doesn't, how to help the poets out. Whatever comments you can leave would be much appreciated. We tend to go, this is how it works. If you'd like to submit poems, up to 2 poems for critique, all you have to do is go to rattle.com/page/critique and find that submission portal, submit up to 2 poems, and we'll go in the order they were received. If you're a regular who participates here, we like to help you out a little sooner, and we will be going going over your poems more quickly. And we have a regular here, Tom Barlow, we're going to come up with first. Is Tom here? Let me see. I haven't said hello to everybody. Run a little behind. We have some more website issues. It just never ends. Steve Farrell is here. Janet McConaughey is here. Jamie Thomas. We got Brian O'Sullivan. Who else we got here? Tom Barlow? Good, Tom's here, because we're going over Tom's poems first, like I said. They were first in the door very early ahead of time. Lynn Schilling is here. Dr. Q. We got David Boos. We got Phyllis Sherritt. Kimberly Gibson Tran. Patty Arbor's here. Desi Cochrane. Deb T. Dick Westheimer is here. Lisa Seidenberg. Jamal Uden. Yeah, looking great. Katie Dozier in the next room over, of course. Maney is here. Okay, great card. Sharon Ferrante, Ali Rowland. Okay, Hemant Malik, Tara Meslick McMahon. Yeah, good to see you all. Anybody over on Facebook? Going once, going twice. Cindy Putnam Guntherman is over there on Facebook. We'll keep an eye on what her comments are too. All right, so like I said, we're going to go over the poems, just talk about what works, what doesn't, where the poems are fitting, how they can be improved, what our reactions are. Really, the most important thing that we do is provide our honest, well-meaning, good spirit responses, like how we're actually reacting to those poems. That's what poets can benefit from the most, is seeing how everybody actually responds to what you've written. And so Tom Barlow is the first poet up. Tom said, I'm enamored of short poems, but not sure how to bring the depth of a Mike White poem. How does he make the magic? I wish I knew. In the second poem, I'm uncertain about how much liberty I can take in writing a story that isn't directly drawn from my personal history. Okay. So, so the first one, a short poem. The short person, I always wish I could, I could write short poems like Mike White or Wendy Vitalock or Andrea Cohen and or Kay Ryan even. And I try sometimes. It's really tough, and so, a lot of times those poems don't actually work, but when they do, there's so much magic to them. I love really, really short poems. I don't know. Let's see what Tom's got for us. See if I have it on the right window. No, hang on a second. We got to switch it to this window. Okay. So this is the first poem up. This is Tom Barlow. Of course, Tom's in Ohio, and this poem is Circumcision. Okay, Circumcision. Before my foreskin and I were even given the chance to acquaint ourselves, off it came, leaving me sleek as a new-laid egg, a misdeed I reminded of 7 times a day with wee Willie in his hand. Such disfigurement, all to beseech the favor of some deity, who I conclude must have a depraved sense of humor, like the grad school gang who goads a boy to eat a worm, and by God he does. Yeah, so it's an interesting topic. I haven't seen a poem about this subject, and it is one of those things. It's sort of a mutilation we kind of take for granted, and or did for a long time anyway. And so it's an interesting thing to be writing about. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just looking at some of the comments. Yeah. And so I think one of the things you have to do to have a poem that works really tightly and concisely is like really even more than, it's always the case, but it becomes even more crucial, is to focus on the images and the concrete details, because you only have so many really like syllables uttered to let us feel like the poem is vivid and some magic has happened and it's come alive. And so if you look at poems by, like who we mentioned, Mike White, Wendy Vitalock, Kay Ryan, they all really have a lot of concrete language in that short space. Even I was thinking about, there's a haiku, I can't remember if I talked about this on a past critique. There was a haiku recently that we published. Was it that Halloween haiku? Maybe I can pull it up really quick. Let's see. Haiku. I wish I could remember I can scroll back. How do I pull it up fast? But even in a haiku, you can have one sort of unusual, concrete, really specific word among 5 words in a really, really tight haiku, and that can bring the poem to life. And so one of the things there is for the kind of concise, tight nugget of a poem it wants to be, or it's trying to be, it had a sort of a casual, like chatty kind of vibe to it. And I think if you work on cutting that even further, I think that's the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to making really, really short poems feel really profound, is having that where every word is really necessary. And so we'll read the poem again, and this is the whole thing, right? Yeah. So Circumcision. Before my foreskin and I were even given the chance to acquaint ourselves. So like something like to acquaint ourselves is a line, it's a whole line. And all it's doing is saying that one, like in a really vague sort of generalized descriptive way, saying that we met each other, and that's not, there's no nothing really hard and strong to hold on to in your mind's eye in a line like that. Off it came, leaving me sleek as a new laid egg. And so that's the first real image, sleek as a new laid egg. And I think that's a good one. And so, the doctor left me sleek as a new laid egg. If that was the first line, then the poem would I think, have a lot more of that feeling that you're looking for, Tom. A misdeed I'm reminded of. And so again, a misdeed I am reminded of. Like, look at the, just take a count. Let's do this. This might be a fun exercise. What's your favorite Mike White poem? Either we published or not. Who published it? Put it in the chat window, and we'll pull it up really quick. Let's see. I mean, yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that because of the delay, it's taken a second. We got Fathers, we got Arms, we got NASCAR. Well, maybe we'll look at a few. Yeah, so we got NASCAR and Southpaw are the 2 requests. We'll look at both. Okay. I think Southpaw is probably a better poem for what we're looking at, but let's look at NASCAR first, and we'll switch the screen view over here. Okay, so this is Mike White's NASCAR. Not rolling in liquid fire or pulled apart by physics, not between commercials, but the way an old dog, half-blind, noses around and around some quiet, apple-scented, chosen ground. And that's the whole thing. Of course, talking about life and death and the way, our behavior is kind of like a NASCAR race, going around in a circle, like that dog. So really wonderful metaphor. I think this one that Neil Postman ordered for metaphor, if I remember right. And so, but I want you to count how many lines are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines. Out of 9 lines, how many lines have like an impact? Like have either a concrete detail or a surprising sort of twist? I think those are the 2 ways you have impacts in a poem, right? So line 1, not rolling in liquid fire. That rolling in liquid fire is a very strong image. Or pulled apart by physics. Another thing, it's undercuts and adjusts what you're looking for. It's sort of pushing out these similes. It's not like this, it's not like this, but they're 2 things that and you don't even know what you're comparing it to. But this thing you're looking at, which is not actually NASCAR, it's life, is compared to those 2 separate things, and it's a surprise each time. And they both have punch each time. They both have some power in those lines, not between commercials. So there's a little bit of humor there, nodding at the NASCAR and how it's all commercial, right? And then we go the old way, but the way an old dog, half blind. And so we have the old dog. They have half blind modifying that. So it's building. Every line is building an image. Noses around and round, some quiet. Even some quiet, which is probably the weakest line in the poem, but it's slowing the poem down and adding detail to this painting, this little tiny painting that's being created, like in the eye of a needle or something. So some quiet, apple scented. It's not just it's apple, that's specificity of the apple. And then the chosen ground, that it's chosen. And so we have all those details that are building out this little tiny scene. And each line is laying out some really really memorable addition to this little scene that's being played out. And if we go back at the Tom Barlow poem, which is, I think the topic is just as interesting, and there's some lines that are just as great, but look how much more unnecessary sort of lines there are in Circumcision. Ready? So before my foreskin and I, and I mean, that's establishing it. So you could say that that's useful, but then we're even given a chance. There's just not a lot there to acquaint ourselves. Not a lot there. Off it came, leaving me. So the first 4 lines don't have nearly as much punch per line, than any of the lines in the Mike White poem. Then sleek as a new laid egg has that level of connection, surprise, and vividness that makes the poem come to life. I am a misdeed I am reminded of 7 times a day, with wee Willie in hand. And so maybe that image altogether, the 3 lines that make that one image, makes something interesting and compelling, but it takes 3 lines to get there. And a misdeed I'm reminded of just isn't that precise. So, and as someone said, wee Willie in hand is probably, I think it was Dick Westheimer pointed out that that's not really, it's a bit cliche and not really a strong image for what you're talking about. And maybe we could do a little bit like that, a little bit different. But that could be said in 1 line is really the point. Such disfigurement, all to beseech. So this disfigurement, I think, is an interesting concept to add. So that's adding something. All to beseech doesn't really add a whole lot. The favor of some deity who I conclude must have. And so the favor of some deity that adds that. But if we got to see the deity a little bit, like in the next few lines, it expanded out like the way this does, but the way an old deity, half blind, noses around his cloud or whatever, if we can build an image out of that, it would become more powerful. But instead we move on, and we have that deity, and we say who I conclude must have. I mean, that's just like syntax. It's just language without any kind of image or necessary movement. Who I conclude must have a depraved sense of humor. And then the humor adds something, a concept that's a bit of a turn, but still not visceral. And then we get a good ending, though. The grade school gang who goads a boy to eat a worm, and by God, he does. And so how could we take, this poem, and if we were doing the super condension style of poetry, which does make for really powerful and profound poems, we would go right to the sleek as a new egg. We would go right and find a quick visual of the god laughing and having a depraved sense of humor. And instead of saying it's a depraved sense of humor, find a way to visualize that, to make it really concrete and memorable, just the image of that. Like a grade school gang who goads a boy to eat a worm, and by God, he does. And then those last 3 lines are wonderful. So really the problem in this poem for making it the kind of poem that you want it to be is that there's just too much clutter in it. And we really want to get to those details really quickly. Let's take a look at the other poem by Mike White that was mentioned, which was Southpaw. And we'll see the same kind of thing. I wonder if Mike White even has any idea. He's been the guest on the Rattlecast, but I wonder if he has any idea that we use him as the example of how to make poems so often. Okay, this is Southpaw. Okay, Southpaw. The boy every boy wanted to be, showing us one day in the dugout how he bloodied his old man's gravestone with a single fist, with a right and a right and a right, because he started to say and stopped. We all looked at our hands. We all had fathers. And so again, it's so tight and concise, but each line is doing real work. And that's the way to think of it, Lines have to be doing work, but especially in a super short poem. So the boy, every boy is an interesting way to start out. Wanted to be, showing us one day in the dugout. So we're getting the scene, the boy that everybody idolizes, and then we get the dugout. So we get a really quick line to paint the scene where you are in the dugout. And this is one of those poems, I should say, that if you don't you don't follow baseball at all, it's limiting as far as who can appreciate it, because you have to understand what a southpaw is. And I think somebody mentioned before they didn't know what a dugout was. What's a dugout? and so there's a kind of admission price for knowing a bit about baseball for this. But it still is painting that scene, if you do, how he bloodied his old man's, and then we have that line, and bloodied his old man's a very, very strong image. We don't know where it's going. And then gravestone is such a strong line break with a single fist, with a right and a right and a right, because he started. And so even with the because, the one of the weakest lines, or least content lines, is that because he started. But still, that's creating the scene where you can imagine this boy that everyone's looking up to in the dugout, starting to say that. And it's an actual piece of dialogue, even though it's really sort of general as far as the writing goes. It's not concrete, but it adds to the whole scene that's going on. But he started to say and stopped. And so you have the whole scene is just being built in these little bit of lines. And then we all looked at our hands. We all had fathers. And the real thing that you might not know, if you don't know, a southpaw is a lefty. And cliched sort of father advice, which everybody gives, is if you're going to get in a fight, if you're a pitcher or some kind of athlete, make sure you use your left, because if you break your right hand, you'll be out for the season. And that's from the movie Bull Durham. Has a famous scene where the Kevin Costner's this old veteran, and there's a hotshot southpaw pitcher, and he is in a bar fight and breaks his hand, and it's the wrong hand. He gets kind of chewed out by Kevin Costner, if I remember right. But that's kind of a thing fathers do tell their sons. And so that all adds into a magical kind of experience in this little poem. But the point is that each line adds something, and that's really the key. And so how to make this a short poem would be to take those really great lines and make the poem all that. Okay, let me see. There's a lot of talking, but somebody, a lot of comments here. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Tran says, it is weird to think that whole ethnic groups and armies have been killed for having foreskins. This poem could go darker if it wants to. Yeah, it really could. Katie says, Katie Dozier, I would be more interested if I felt this were an extended metaphor, which I think could be achieved in part through the title. That's interesting too. I mean, we can always add an extra layer by doing that, by making the title something disconnected and more a leap from the content of the poem. Yeah. All right. Sticky Little Leaf says, the egg imagery actually makes me think of Frost's phallic metaphor, pale orchises and spied a bright green snake. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And when someone says it might be helpful to think what a circumcision may be a metaphor for. Yeah, exactly. And Lisa Seidenberg says, have to ask, is the worm meant to reference back to the wee willy? Then there is a metaphor. Yeah, I think it definitely does. At least imagistically, it leads back to that. Yeah. Steve Farrell says, I have short poems that need to get shorter. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If you're going to go short, like go home or go all the way or whatever. Desi Cochrane says, if this was only cut down, though, would it be enough? And let's think about that a little bit more. So as Katie Dozier mentioned, if you had an extended metaphor, if we switched the title to something else, and the whole foreskin issue could be standing in for another broader topic besides for just that, then that definitely could stand by itself. Let's see. But let's see if we just thought about that. If it was just, the doctor left me sleek as a new egg, a misdeed I remember 7 times a day. Well, some deity watches, laughing like the grade school gang who goads a boy to eat a worm, and by God, he does. Is that enough? I don't know. To me, I think it's enough to be an interesting poem that way. If we just cut it down to the 6 lines that it could be, that really is, then I think the poem does work. And you have to wonder, like, is NASCAR? The reason why NASCAR is so great is because it's this rope of twisting many metaphors all into one poem, because it's both comparing NASCAR to this dog that's tied to a rope, so it goes around and around in a circle, and then just by sort of talking about the grander issues of mortality itself through the liquid fire and the physics, like the end of life itself is what we're talking about there really briefly. It could be, you could say on one level that it's just a metaphor for these cars going around in a circle all the time, and how boring is that? And yet it adds that third layer. So it's like three metaphors woven together, which make that poem really powerful. Because imagine if the title wasn't NASCAR. What if the title is something else? The poem would still kind of work, but you have that third layer on top of it that makes the poem just so tight and concise and interesting. And then what that chosen ground means too is so interesting. And so this poem has a lot going for it. Let me look at one more of the Mike White poems. And this is another one too. Is the first one that came up. It's even shorter. Arms. Angels do not exist. Bombs exist. At someone say so, they fall from the clouds. They carry you off, you who to them weigh nothing. And so there's a great silence in that weigh nothing. But you could say here, does it do enough here either? And I think it does, obviously. And again, we have that title, which is again a kind of metaphor, because arms are, of course, the weapons, and then we talk about being carried off and what carrying off means, and how your life means nothing. It weighs nothing to the people with the arms that are carrying you off. And so it's a really profound anti-war poem there, because, again, of the layers of metaphor. So I think Katie had a great point by, if we change the title from something, I mean, imagine if this was weapons instead of arms, it would still kind of work. We would say, is it enough? Yeah, it's an interesting poem. But then to call it arms and add that extra level, because you're trying to build a poem, especially these small poems, that you want that people, they're poems to be read again and again and again for sure. And you want people to have something to kind of like a knot to have to untie that like gnaws at you, And the way that extra metaphor that provides the thing to keep gnawing at and keeps to stick with you. That's like the stickiness is having so much tied into one thing, and having that extra metaphor is really a key to that. So if we shift back and look at the circumcision, could we call it something else? And you have to think of that. But what could you call it that would make the poem really jump out? Because there are some great lines in here too, and it's an interesting topic. Okay, let's take a look at the other poem. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, let's take a look at the other poem. The other poem is this, and it's a longer poem. Let me look again at what the Tom's question was. He says, I'm uncertain about how much liberty I can take in writing a story that isn't directly drawn from my personal history. Okay, that's a good question too. And I think that's a question where everybody has a different answer. And so it's almost like what you're actually comfortable with. But here we go. Every morning at Benny's Diner, the usual jury of geezers is seated at the horseshoe counter. Free refills won't color our deliberations today over town scandals, the railroad's poor-ass pensions, and burnt toast. I'm ready to order my short stack and eggs, but Rachel, our waitress, has disappeared again, and Benny is too stubborn to start any prep without an order slip, although my breakfast hasn't changed in 10 years. John, the old machinist who always sits to my left, is trying to foist off a mini Bible on a lineman we heard blaspheme from a booth behind us. We regulars have all earned one. Otherwise, he's seldom well received, as in the case now. I'm curious about the peace he seems to find there, despite all the times he's been turned away, because me, my dad, my grandma, we all suffer from rancor running through us like a coal seam, unlike my more settled buddies, now tapping their empty cups on the counter. I pretend to myself that one can suss me out, but every wicked man sheds clues like the leaves he kicks up in November. I take a side glance to make sure my wit hasn't been too sharp this morning. For these gruff men, they temper me when no one else can. Rachel's still on her phone outside by the dumpster, probably quarreling with an ex again. So I circle the counter, pick up the coffee pot, and fill her cups. There are only so many ways to show love. So I like, I like the intimacy and the details here in this poem, and I think the voice is very, connected and authentic too. Yeah, Nancy Tennell says, rancor running through us like a coal seam. Yeah, that's a great line, too. I really like the last line as well. To have that gesture, and then there are only so many ways to show love. I think that's great. About the general question, and what comes to mind here, my opinion about how much leeway you have, and maybe I'm just like, I'm on one end of the spectrum, I guess. But to me, if the poem rings true, I don't care what the details are and how accurate the facts are. I don't care whose story it is that you're telling. In part because everybody's story is so clouded by the subjective nature of reality and how much our internal biases cloud our perceptions of things. I don't really believe there is one reality that we even have access to. So I don't think there's a reality that is any one's reality. It's all our perceptions of reality, and they're all wrong so much of the time that it's it's hard to get care about that. And the other thing that comes to mind on this topic is the story. If you go back and look at the conversation that Alan Fox had in issue number 27 with Patricia Smith, there's a really interesting backstory that Patricia Smith has. Of course, she's been a Pulitzer Prize finalist and, a 4-time National Slam poetry champion, a wonderful, just amazing, one of the best poets ever. And Patricia used to be a reporter for, I think it was the Boston Globe. And she had a big scandal because she was in her story sort of making people into composites and sort of not being factually accurate with the details. If there was as she told it, if there were a few people at the scene, she kind of mixed them in to make the best story and she kept doing that in a way and got in trouble for it. And the thing is, it doesn't work in journalism if you get caught. But in poetry, who cares? That means you're a poet. If you want to mix and make the story better and more accurate to the actual reality, the deeper truth that is beyond the facts. And so, I like to think of it as there's this truth out there that we're all trying to get at. We really can't. And, facts are things that are true for one moment in time and space, or maybe one time continuum, one universe in the multiverse or something. They happen to be true then. But truth is a deeper thing that's true across all iterations of the universe, and if you're getting at those truths, who cares about which part of the multiverse you happen to be in, whether or not the shirt was blue or if I'm wearing a green shirt right now. It just doesn't matter on that level of detail. And so I say, tell your story, tell the best story, and who cares about the truth, unless you're, of course, naming who it is, then you're in a sort of journalism mode. If it's about an actual person who you're identifying, then you're in sort of a journalistic perspective, and you have to be true because there are facts within that narrow confines of the journalistic aspect of the poem. But otherwise, let the poem go, make the poem as good as it can be. It'll be my perspective. So just don't worry about that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, as Dry Mantillo says, poetry is not reporting. The truthfulness that matters in poetry isn't historical fact, but what the poem is about. So you have to identify what the poem is to communicate and to be accurate there. Yeah. Yeah. All right, well, let's look at the poem in a little bit more detail. Okay. Every morning at Benny's Diner. And I like the opening. I like we get to know her here. I think, I don't know, people have all, you have the experience where you walk by that group of old men that are sitting around at a diner or something on the porch, and they have the same coffee every morning. And you kind of wonder what it'll be like to be there. Anyway, so it's a good opening. Every morning at Benny's Diner, the usual jury of geezers is seated at the horseshoe counter. Free refills won't color our deliberations today over the scandals, or over town scandals, the railroads, poor-ass pensions, and burnt toast. So I think really great, vivid opening. I think somebody said, I can't remember, who it was, said great first stanza. And it is. It's very vivid. It's got all those things we were saying some of the lines didn't have in the last poem. It's got all the detail and specificity that's bringing the poem to life right away. I'm ready to order my short stack and eggs, but Rachel, our waitress, has disappeared again, and Benny is too stubborn to start any prep without an order slip, although my breakfast hasn't changed in 10 years. So that's a fun detail, too. So the whole stanza really sets up the scene really well. You kind of get a sense of who these people are around and what the scene's like. John, the old machinist who always sits to my left, is trying to foist off a mini Bible on a lineman we heard blaspheme from a booth behind us. We regulars have all earned one. Otherwise, he's seldom well received, as is the case now. So this, I think this, I like the detail in this section, but it feels a little clunky. It doesn't feel as smoothly told as the second line. I feel like this maybe, sometimes you get the sense of a stanza that's been revised a lot. And I think it's been revised outside of the natural voice it was written in. That's my sense of it. There's just a few choices of like which lines to be long and which lines to be short are don't seem as natural as the other sections, or at least the first stanza. So I like the content, but I think we can retell it a little bit more smoothly, I would say. And then as let's see, Kimberly Gibson Trent says, I'm getting lost a bit in the plot of stanza 2. Maybe John can talk about a town scandal so we can learn about John and the town. Yeah. Rachel Grief says, you spelled Rachel wrong. Okay. So anyway, as I'm thinking of this poem, I think this is how my brain processes this. I'm loving the setup. I'm a little like wondering how this is going to relate and why it's going to be important, but I'm willing to go along with it. It feels a little bit clunky, but I'm willing. But I like the details. I'm curious about the peace he seems to find there, despite all the times he's been turned away. Because me, my dad, my grandma, we all suffer from rancor running through us like a coal seam. Again, that's a really nice simile. Unlike my more settled buddies, now tapping their empty cups on the counter. So I think it's a bit, because of the way that the mini Bible being foist on the lineman, I think the details of him trying to sort of proselytize are lost a little bit. And I think maybe if we had some, a cleaner sense of revealing that part of the story, then we'd get a better shot at the poem. But it's the proselytizing we're talking about. Kimberly Gibson Trent says, I'm still waiting for a scandal by stanza 3. Yeah. I'm curious about the peace he seems to find there, despite all the times he's been turned away, because me, my dad, my grandma, we all suffer from the rancor running through us like a coal seam, unlike my more subtle buddies now tapping their empty cups on the counter. I pretend to myself that no one can suss me out, and suss me out as like an atheist. I'm not sure what, or just as I'm a little unclear about what that means, that I'm sort of crabby, like the rancor we're talking about. But every wicked man sheds clues. Is the wicked, are they all religious and you're not? Is that, so it's a little bit murky. But every wicked man sheds clues like the leaves he kicks up in November. And I just wonder about that, what the wicked means. I'm not really sure how to place that within the context of the story. Like how wicked? Like wicked in what way? I take a side glance to make sure my wit hasn't been too sharp this morning for these gruff men. They temper me when no one else can. Kimberly again says, I want to judge these guys, this jury, by their actions, not thoughts. Oh yeah, they were a jury. That slipped my mind a little bit. Rachel's still on her phone outside by the dumpster, probably quarreling with her ex again. So I circle the counter, pick up the coffee pot and fill their cups. There are only so many ways to show love. And again, I really like the end. I like that gesture at the end. To me, I think it's just sort of unclear really what the wicked means. I think that's, to me, that's like the little knot where it's not as clear as it could be. There's different ways you could take that. And I think, that the storytelling in the middle gets sort of muddled a little bit. And so that would be my focus of adjusting this poem. And Clayton Clark says, love the ending. Yeah, Jamie Thomas says, there's so much love in this piece, Tom. Great storytelling and imagery. David Booth says, I get the feeling that the author is bearing injury from religion, hence the rancor. Is that what he's worried will be sussed out? That's the thing. So that this is a question. This was David Booth. And the fact that this is a question and something we don't really know, it's not the kind of thing that we should be left wondering about. We should be left wondering how to interpret the meaning of the story we're told. Like that's the kind of thing that we like to gnaw on, those knots we were talking about with like Mike White's poems. But the specific details of what just happened, it shouldn't be something that we're wondering about. And so I think it just needs more clarity in this second section. Because otherwise it has a nice story. It's nicely introduced. and then nicely close. And I think that all works. So I think it's a good, yeah. Yeah, and NC Tennell says, suss me out is investigating if he's telling the truth. What do they suspect him? Yeah, telling the truth about what? I just feel like we don't get the whole story here. Brian O'Sullivan says, I think Wicked is sort of explained by what the previous stanza says about suffering from rancor, though it could be still be more concrete. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of just, there's a little too much ambiguity in that. Rachel Grease says, I wonder if the speaker is the same age as the older guys or younger, an outsider. Yeah. So anyway, so I really like that. It's just the lack of clarity in the center about what is Wicked. So, and as somebody said, and it's too far to scroll back, but somebody said, I'd like to see, how these people feel, rather than hear about what they think or say, and I think if we had maybe some dialogue introduced in this poem, a little bit more of like the actual scene, a little more showing, don't telling in that second section, so we can know really what you're getting at. Because I think the opening and the closing are really good. Yeah. Okay. Winston Munn puts it this way: there's an unsaid and unwritten perhaps in this poem that needs to be cleansed. That's an interesting way to put it, but yeah. Okay. So just tell it a little more in the middle sections. Okay, let's move on. It's been a lot of talk, but these are good poems, Tom. Thanks for sharing these. A lot of great detail, both really interesting, and definitely you can tell that there's topics that are being worked on and creatively explored in both these poems, which is more than half the battle usually. So great work and good details too. All right, let's go to we're going to move to the oldest poems in the queue now, and first we have let's see, we have Dreamers by Annika Chowdhury from Poland. I think this, let's see, this is from October 5th. Okay, no questions, just a quick poem, and we'll look at it quick. We'll try to move as quickly as possible through these poems. I think the title is Dreamers, yeah. Dreamers, fly with your wings, enjoy the colors of your life, unless you know it doesn't harm others. Some will like it, some won't. Some will say, if I can't, then why do you? If you did, then why did you do that? They will shoot you with words, then try to stop you with their eyes. Don't run away, don't lose hope. Do you know dreamers are the winners? But those who give up and hinder others, they are the losers. So we have some sort of generalized advice here. The poem, it's some sort of, self-help type advice in poem form. And, what it's missing really is concrete images and details and sort of surprising, unusual things that make the poem come to life. Like it's easy to paraphrase and describe, after the fact what this poem was about, but it's hard to remember any specific detail from the poem. And so the poem won't stick with you. And the whole point of a poem is really stickiness. You go back to the beginning of what poetry was. It was the first technology to record stories over the telephone game of time, and stories would keep changing and changing, and we developed this oral tradition where we gotta use all these poetic devices mnemonically so that we would retain our stories and not and keep them pure and true across generations, binding our tribes together. And that's what poetry is really about. That's why it's rooted in our neural bundles, and so having those concrete images, having rhymes and rhythms that you can easily remember. Those kind of things are what make a poem come to life, and having sort of generalities doesn't it's things that are worth saying, but it's not sticky enough, and that stickiness is what really matters. And so how do we do that? Tell the actual story, bring out specific unusual details, fly with your wings, enjoy the colors of your life. But who is the you? Are you talking to me? Are you talking to yourself? Where's the story here? Unless you know it doesn't harm others. Some will like it, some won't. Some will say, if you can't, then why do you? So instead, if we started out with these dreamers and then fly with your wings, how could we make that? Like, think about how you could make that so it's an actual person with wings. Landing, and then instead of some like it and some won't, how would a few actual people relate to that, seeing that person with wings? I mean, you could bring a real poem to life with this by creatively expressing that instigating hypothesis, that instigating image of somebody being there with wings, and what would people actually say, and how would they interact with them? And you could get something there. But instead, we stay in these generalities that are giving a nice lesson, but not making it vivid. And I think, and that's what's really missing in this poem. So more detail and more storytelling is what we need here. Okay, we're gonna move on to another poem. And I bumped my camera. Let me shift it over there a little more. Is that better? Yeah, that's better. Okay. So next up, we have. All right, let me scroll down. Okay. Annika Zurin Chowdhury. Was this the same poet as last time? No. Annika Zurin Chowdhury. No questions again. Again, we get a poem pasted in. Outside Her Own World is the title. Again, the poem is in the subject line rather than above the poem, so you can't see it. But she is eager to play, to laugh, to rise above the world. She perceives the world through her own vision. However, rumors continue to circulate, saying things like, "You are different, you know." They are unable to get a glimpse of her brilliance, as she says, "Not now." She yearns to run, to dance in a wild and unrestrained manner while others obey. Even when they disagree with her perspective, her pals refer to her as naughty and rude, among other names. In spite of this, she finds happiness in the vulgar, in her tender heart. In the middle of the night, why do mom and dad cry? Why are they so concerned about her, and why are they hugging her so tightly? Despite the fact that she does not belong, she has a brilliant spirit. In a world that is full of dreams, she is looking for her own light. Being unique and appreciating every shade is perfectly acceptable. One day we will all recognize the beauty that you possess. No youngster will ever experience being bullied, and no heart will ever cry tears when acceptance rules supreme and love triumphs over fear. So the title again, it says Jamie Thomas Smith's Outside Her Own World. It's in the header of the file. And so again, I just refer to the last poem. This is slightly a bit more detail, but we just need more detail. We need more storytelling. We need to know who she is. If you can set up a kind of a poem again, like we were talking about with the wings here, where people get a glimpse of the brilliance, and we can imagine how that actually plays out. But a lot of telling going on here, as Winston Munn says. Kimberly Gibson Tran says she has a brilliant spirit. Better get the reader come to their own conclusions about this rather than interpret them. Yeah. And so there's a lot of, we need story showing, a lot of telling going on here. So what is Winston Munn? And yeah, that's the thing. We want to hear your stories. We want to know the details. We want to know who's what. We want to know what happened. If you want to have an abstract, sort of surreal, fantastical kind of poem that doesn't, exist in this world, but there's some kind of, metaphoric world you're creating, you could have, you could make that own world, that own vision we're talking about, be specific and have details in that regard, and then play off that creatively. But we have to bring that world to life. And that's by saying things not like they're able to get a glimpse of her brilliance, but actually showing the brilliance and then showing how they actually react to her brilliance. And so Ali Rowland says, great subject for a poem if it can be told in an interesting way. And I think, Ali, that's a great point. Great subject for a poem. And those are two, the last two poems both have this in common, where they both feel like they have a great subject for a poem. We want to write about this advice, really, and how to live a life. And there's a way that, in a touching way, that it's being told to the self. It's like self-writing a little bit. And so we have the story we want to tell. or the moral we want to tell, but we don't have the vehicle through which to tell it. And that's the backwards way to write. All great writing comes from having a story to tell that we don't know what the moral is, that we're finding our way through, that's complicated and difficult, and that in the process of telling the story, that's how we find the moral. And so having the moral lesson first is sort of a backwards way to create a poem or any piece of art, really. And then that's why and it just sort of stifles creativity. And so we want, so have a scene, have some kind of image that you're stuck on it, and describe and build from that until the morality and the lesson you want to give reveals itself to you. That's the direction to be writing, not in the direction from I have this moral lesson I want to share, and how can I transform this into an image? You get the image in the story first, and the moral of the story later. Okay, and so both these last two poems, I think, suffer from that just being written in the wrong direction. And as no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. That's just a fundamental of not just writing, but creativity. Creativity comes from where we're digging and churning and finding something we didn't realize we knew, or something like that. Okay, so let's take a look. As Jamie Thomas says, I'll add this too. Jamie says, there's a reason the poet wants to share this advice too. That story is what I'd be most interested in, not necessarily the lesson. And that's a great way to put it too, or a great way to think about it. Like we want to hear the actual thing that makes you want to say this. Like we want to hear about your life or your whatever happened. We want to know that story because we can learn from that, and we can feel connected to you. We have empathy through hearing the actual story of what's going on, not the sort of moral parable that's trying to be told here. We want the actual story. That's what we'll find engaging. Okay, let's move on to the next poem again. And next up, we have Jessica Little Elk. And I think what happened, I think Jessica sent poems. I think she sent a poem twice, and then there's a third poem here, and then we had some confusion. I didn't read her second poem, but I think this is a new poem from Jessica Little Elk, and she says, "I'm new to publishing my work anywhere, so be gentle." I think I don't know how gentle is. We always try to be helpful. That's always our goal. Never trying to be mean about anything. We just want to help people express themselves better, because not only do we enjoy poems more, but they do more for you. I mean, there's a real psychological reason why expressive writing heals, like it actually does. But it only heals when it's done in an authentic way, where you're actually making these connections that you haven't really articulated yet. That sort of brings your psyche into coherence and really helps, like physically. So learning to express yourselves and surprise yourself when you're writing is what we're trying to do for both yourself and for us, because that's what we appreciate too. Is it the contrition poem? Is it the same one? In the eve of contrition, I found myself in the eye of the storm, in conflicted chaos. Is this the same one? Maybe it's the same one. I feel like I've looked at this a whole bunch of times. Okay, I am complete. Yeah. So I don't know what the deal is. Let's take a look at this, because okay. In the eve of contrition, I found myself in the eye of the storm. I still rebelled in conflict and chaos. I could never leave in the pain that held me, held no need to grieve in foggy confusion. I became enlightened, and when love called, I was not silent. Every moment with you, I surrender my heart in the moments alone. I fall apart in melancholy. They found me tearless. The midnight hour found me fearless. Through waves of regret, I returned, nothing, deep in reflection. There I stood stunning. A consequence of destiny is how the trepidation, it rests in me. In your arms I sleep and dream of butterflies. Your peace is my relief. Doubt will need some better lies. In your kiss I am tamed and acquiesce defeat in the throes of your passion. Kimberly Gibson Trent says it's an attractive shape. A poem shaped to me, reads quickly and lets me meditate on short phrases. Yeah, it's nicely revealed. Yeah, Yeah, so I'm kind of confused too about what we read it before. But I think the same stuff sort of applies that I was saying about the last poem, the last few poems. It is, we want to hear the actual story, not the abstract version of the story. And I think in the eve of contrition, like contrition over what? I found myself in the eye of the storm, and it's a bit of a cliche. I still rebelled in conflict and chaos. I could never leave. So what is the conflict and chaos? Like, again, that is the story that we want to tell, or we want to hear. And if you go back, like talking about that writing is healing, if you go back and look at the James Pennebaker interview that I did, that psychologist at the University of Texas, talking about expressive writing as healing, it's getting the actual facts and details and out that make that make the healing process actually work. And so for that reason, you want to get the actual details out. So what is the conflict? What is the chaos? Like, abstracting it away is conflict and chaos doesn't get you to that internal healing, and it doesn't get us into a compelling story that we want to empathize with you and learn from. So tell us what that conflict and chaos is, what the pain was, what happened. Held no need to grieve in foggy confusion. I became enlightened, and when love called, I was not silent. Every moment with you, I surrender my heart. In the moments alone, I fall apart. We have I surrender my heart, and the moments alone fall apart. And if you have, there are a few times rhyme sneaks in. I think rhyme is much better when it's much more regular. It ends up being where you sort of get this little earworm in your ear, and you start rhyming, and you want to keep the rhyming going. And there's some rhymes, tearless and fearless, come later. And I think those don't really fit with the voice of the poem, too. As Tom Barlow was saying, the same thing, I think. Yeah. They found me fearless or tearless. Who found the speaker? Too many theys in these last couple poems. Yeah. They're the abstraction, and there's a distance. We sort of are afraid to tell the story, and so there's all these little ways that we go about, maintaining a distance from the story. But really, it's the story that needs to get out, and so we need to get some sense. And I think often, I lost my train of thought, but anyway, yeah. So I started to talk and read comments at the same time sometimes. But anyway, we want to hear the story, and so we want to know who things are actually happening to and what's actually going on. I'll keep reading. I fall apart in melancholy. They found me tearless. The midnight hour found me fearless. Through waves of regret, like regretting what? Like, we need to know, again, it's just the story isn't here for us. Deep in reflection, there I stood, stunning. In consequence of destiny is how the trepidation rests in me. In your arms I sleep and dream of butterflies. Your peace is my relief. Doubt will need some better lies. In your kiss I am tamed. So suddenly we're tamed again. So I feel like there is like a sense of movement, like something's changed in the course of the story. And yet I don't really feel like we're told the story. And so that's just my advice here. Like, tell us the extra story. If you, tell us what happened. And as Winston Munn says, I crave specifics rather than abstract generalizations. I will say about the poem, there is, as someone I think it was Jamie Thomas mentioned, a really nice sense of rhythm, and the speech is very natural. So I think there's an ear for poetry in this poem. And I just hope, you keep writing, Jessica, and but just, you have to not have that wall up that's trying not to tell us the story, because that's what you need to get out, and that's what we need to hear if you're going to be publishing them too. And so, and if you get the story out and you don't want to share it and publish it, there's nothing wrong with that either. But getting the actual details down is what makes a poem valuable. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to one more poem. But thanks for sharing this, Jessica, and I hope we figured out whatever was confusing about whether or not this was in there before or whatever. Okay, so let's take a look at one more. And last but not least, we will do Jillian Yager from Southern California. I'm a very new writer, and I have mostly just been using it to express my feeling. Okay. I just really want to see if what I write and the intention behind it can be analyzed, or if it just sounds like words mashed together. Thank you so much. Okay, so we might have another of the same kind of mode, which is, this is where you start, I should say, too, with poems. You start out feeling like you need to get things out, and then you learn more and read more. Reading is especially important about what resonates with you, what makes a poem, a story memorable for you, and then you put those kind of things into it. And the issue with being too vague in general, too, is not only do we want to hear the story, but we can't even understand it without the context. And sort of the context. That's why it's the initial phase of writing, is that the context that's swirling around all these lines that you're writing and are being abstract about, but we as readers have no idea like what the actual story is. And so that's like the first phase. You sort of fall in love with writing by getting it out while you know the context, and then learning how to transfer that context so other people could understand what happened too, is like the second step. And so there's really like nothing wrong with writing here to start, or even continuing that way if, journaling is what you want to do. But to be sharing it, it's about, conjuring those scenes, making it come to life for other readers so that we can learn more about what it means to be human too, and remember it and take it with us all our lives, which is what great poems do. Okay, so anyway, this poem is called Returns and Salutations. Let's see if it has the same... it has sort of the hallmarks of the same issues, but let's see if it does. And you can see, too, with the last 3 submissions, how common that is. Again, nothing to be ashamed about. All the great nobles, all the king's men, it seems I have been finally put back together again. Ships send news of my trials, how their tellings reek of salt, oh my great earthy tribulations. Now my skin, oh yes, scarred and somewhat marred, heals up daintily so, tied with bows and lace. Oh, what a pretty face. Give them feast. Give me a bit of cake. But let it not be mistaken. I am not pity. I am not the inaction of the great parliament. I am beauty and grace. For whatever time I have left, observe as this is, for better or worse, my time of glory. Do not be fooled, because my lips are red and my face is a rosy maroon, because so is the blood I shed. Okay. And so, so the same thing applies here. Like we said, it's abstract to the point where we don't really know what the actual story is, and the context is missing. The context as you're writing, so it means a lot, but to get that out is really helpful. And so we don't want to be generalizing unless we have like a concrete, real story to be pushing off of. There's ways you can do sort of surreal poems that don't... I don't know, like tell the actual story, but tell it through metaphor. I mean, that's a way you can do it. But the story feels missing here. It feels like you're withholding it from us. And so tell us what you're really writing about if you want to share these poems. I think we'll just skip the other one because it's probably the same thing. There's just so much distance, and read contemporary poetry and see how that's all working, or even, going back to really the turn of poetry into what it does in the modern world is like around the Edgar Allan Poe, Emily Dickinson kind of era, Walt Whitman. So go back anything between now and then, anything the last 150 years, and read more of that and see how the details of the speaker emerge. Okay, so I think that is going to wrap it up. Let me see. Yeah, the other poem. Yeah, there's too much. A good poem to start out for next week, it looks like. So we're going to wrap that up there. Thanks, everybody, for joining me and for being on the critique. It's always a lot of fun. Hopefully it was helpful to everybody who participated. We're really welcoming, and I hope it feels that way to everybody at all levels of skill and all times you started writing, how long ago. Please do click the like button if you haven't yet. I forgot to say that. There are twice as many people watching as have clicked like so far, and that really helps. Yeah, watch the cliche, more different ways to describe. Yeah. So that is going to wrap up the critique of the week. This week's guest on the Rattlecast is going to be Stephen Gibson. So Stephen, and he sent some other poems too, but the book we'll be focusing on is Frida Kahlo and Fort Lauderdale. And these are all triolets, ekphrastic poems written after Frida Kahlo paintings and other, I think, sculptures too. So we have a whole bunch of artwork to show, and then Stephen Gibson's responses to it. Stephen's also a really wonderful poem. A lot of different formal elements going on in his poems. We'll be looking at some older poems too, and some newer poems in addition to poems from this book. But the focus will be his new one, Frida Kahlo in Fort Lauderdale. That is Rattlecast number 285. The prompt for this week was to write a poem about a time that you carried more than you ever thought possible. Wait, no, that was last week. Is this not updated? Okay, let me look somewhere else. I really thought I updated that. Okay, the prompt for this week actually is... for this week. Oh, sorry. Hang on. Just bear with me. I gotta open this file. The prompt for this week actually is write a poem that references small talk in a big way. That's going to be your prompt for this week. That's right. Write a poem that references small talk in a big way. That's your prompt for this week on the prompt lines. Guest once again, Stephen Gibson. The regular time, Sunday, March 16th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week in the meantime. Oh, and we also have a new episode, part 2, as Katie Dozier reminds me, of the Poetry Space, how to read poems. We look at some deep dives into poems, some we love, at least one that we didn't really like that much, thanks to Nate Jacob. But we have that to look at, so go to the Poetry Space on iTunes and listen to that. Part 1 was last week, Part 2 is this week. Really fun discussion. So that's what you can do tonight or tomorrow. And then Sunday, Stephen Gibson, Rattlecast 285, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Good night.